early. It's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Achanta Gopal. He's a faculty member at the Department of Condensed Matter Physics and Materials Science at TIFR in Mumbai since 2004. In 2000, he completed his PhD in physics at the Solid State Electronics Group, also at TIFR in Mumbai. From 2000 to 2003, he worked as a NITO Fellow at FESTA Laboratories in Japan. FESTA is the headquarters of the Japanese National Femtosecond Technology Project. There he worked on the development of inter-subband transition-based all-optical switches for 1 terabit per second network.
Thank you. First, I would like to thank Dr. Sahni for giving this opportunity. This is my second visit here, and after my first visit about a year and a half ago, I'm very happy to be back here. So the title is pretty broad because I'm a bit confused, I guess, because it's not yet very focused. We don't have very focused results as yet. It's an ongoing work, okay. So our motivation is to look at solid state information processing. So as Ruth explained yesterday, one of the approaches is to use photonic integrated circuits. So our idea is to use a combination of metallic and dielectric photonic crystals or periodic metallic and dielectric nanostructures for processing information locally and for interconnects, and then photons as flying qubits. So as we all know, the information processing in general requires generation, control and detection of photons. We are mostly looking at photonic crystal microcavity structures. So far, our activity was focused on designing the microcavity structures for various applications. Okay, and so the outline of my talk is look at photonic crystal microcavity design and some initial measurements at Sheffield. Then fabrication using interferometric lithography for 1D and 2D metallodielectric nanostructures. Then I'll also talk about surface plasmon dynamics in periodic metallic and metallodielectric nanostructures, and little bit on colloidal dots. Okay. So after two nice talks of yesterday with a lot of introduction from Ruth and Andrew, I haven't had much of introduction material left. So I thought okay, I'll talk about photonic crystals as an introduction. Okay. So the photonic crystals are essentially periodic variation of dielectric constants. We can have 1D or 2D kind of structures where in 1D it's alternating layers of materials with different refractive indices. So this causes a periodic variation of dielectric constant for the light instant and traveling from one side to the other. Or we can have 2D structures where we can have in air dielectric rods, or we can have in a dielectric material holes drilled in a periodic fashion. So this leads to the photonic crystals, the periodic patterns, periodic potential for the light. Okay. So if you look at a perfect photonic crystal, for example here, okay, it shows a photonic band gap. Okay, where there are no electromagnetic modes or allowed. But what is more interesting is if you modify one of these holes, okay, the size, shape or position of these holes can be modified, which leads to a defect in the photonic crystal, which is more interesting as it can permit localized modes to exist inside the photonic band gap, which we designed for. Okay. So the interesting part is if you modify one of these, this acts like a defect, and the periodic holes on either side will act like mirrors, and thus we get a microcavity. Okay, so we can design so that the light field gets more localized in this region, and we can have in essence cavity QED kind of studies in these solid state materials. Okay, there are lots of reports of photonic crystal cavities with very high Q. Okay. So for example, the NODA structure, which is a L3 cavity structure with the 3 missing holes, and then they shift these 2 holes away from the center as shown here. Okay. So the problem with this is either the mode volume is pretty large, or you don't have a very good mode centered at one single location where you can put in a quantum dot, for example, or a defect material which you can put in inside the cavity region. Okay. Similarly, like there is one report from Caltech, like which shows a theoretical estimate of 10 power 5 and the experimental value of 10 power 4. Here again, the mode is not very well suited for having a quantum dot or a defect material of in a one single location. So there are some structures which are reported from Stanford group where like the mode is very nicely confined at the center here, but the problem is like the experimentally reported Qs are just about few thousand, which is pretty low. Okay. More recently, like in 2007, like there is a Canadian group which reported experimental Q values of 28,000, where the mode profile seems to be pretty good, well centered, and very nice, very small mode volume, which seems to be pretty good for quantum dot work. But the problem here is the structure. The defect structure is pretty complicated for fabrication, and like we are looking at structures which are simpler to make. Okay. So that's where we ended up with the L0 cavities. So the advantage is that like it's a periodic hole structure. The only change we make in the periodic structure is that we shift these two holes away from the center, so that the defect is created in the center, and then this is the calculated mode profile for a structure. The parameters are given here. A is the lattice constant, which is separation between the two holes, and R is the radius of the air hole, and the shift is essentially how much this hole is shifted from the center. Okay, and the thickness is essentially the thickness of the slab which we take. Okay, Ruth has mentioned earlier yesterday that like the vertical confinement is pretty important. I'll just discuss briefly about it. Okay, the way we estimate the Q is essentially we calculate the cavity mode lifetime by launching a short pulse into the cavity and then let it evolve over time. So you calculate the Maxwell's equations, like the evolution, and then like you plot a exponential decay to the exponential fit to the decay profile. So that gives you the lifetime from which by knowing the defect mode wavelength, like we can calculate the cavity Q. Okay. These Qs are modest, like in the less than or near 10,000 values which we could get for the L0 structures. Okay. So as I said, like there are the total Q factor of a given cavity is defined by 1 over Q is essentially 1 over Q perpendicular plus 1 over Q parallel. The Q perpendicular is essentially the in plane Q value, okay, which can be large. If you have a very big structure, essentially you can confine more field within the plane. Okay, so that gives you large Q perpendicular, which is pretty easy to get in most of the structures. But what is important is the Q parallel, how the field, the electric field is leaking out of the your slab active layer. So confining that within the slab is more important, okay, for most of the structures. So the structure which looked at is the air bridge structure. So essentially there is air on the top of this cap layer, and then like this aluminum gallium arsenide layer is etched out, okay, to get a air in the air at the bottom. So we have air here and air here. So the thickness which I said 0.2 micron is essentially this entire region. Okay. So this is one of the fabricated structures. This is again fabricated at St. Andrews. Okay. This is the air bridge structure where you can see clearly the hanging, the bridge like active layer structure. So this is a periodic air hole pattern from the top view. Okay. So here we see cavity enhanced quantum dot emission in this case. So it did some basic measurements of looking at the temperature dependence, tuning the quantum dot resonance in and out of the cavity mode, and seeing like how it changes the cavity Q, and then like some low Q cavity structures where we don't see any strong confinement. Okay. And then some power dependence. So this is all done with Ruth at Sheffield. So that's one part. Like, so we are continuing our work on finding or designing photonic crystal cavity structures for single photon source. So essentially, like we have optimized the cavity structures with bottom reflectors. These so-called Lee structures, which were first proposed by Lee et al. So this was the two wavelengths which we are interested in. One is a 0.95 micron wavelength, which is suitable for the indium arsenide quantum dots, and the other one is nitrogen doped gallium phosphide. Okay, this is an emission at around 0.54 microns. Okay, so I'll talk briefly about this because most of this has been covered by the Ruth and Andrew. Okay, so the cavity Q achieved in these Lee type structures, we have about 15,000 to 35,000 depending on the wavelength. As you have seen, like the Q essentially goes as 1 over lambda naught. The lambda naught is the wavelength. So if you go to shorter wavelengths, it's difficult to get larger Qs. Okay. So here in this Lee type structure, like we are looking at quadrupole modes, and we also check the far field pattern. Okay. One interesting aspect which I see in calculating the far field pattern is from your talk. Like, so essentially we are trying to look at what we do is essentially we just calculate the far field mode by brute force solving of Maxwell's equations. Possibly if we look at one of these algorithms and see like if we can find how we can get the pattern, like I mean how the field is coupling to the far field would be very interesting. Okay. So just look at this gallium phosphide with nitrogen doping. So the merits of this is that like they have definite energy, okay, and very small inhomogeneous broadening. So these are all like comparisons with respect to the quantum dots. Quantum dots are known to have large inhomogeneity, even for single dots. Okay, so the inhomogeneity which is reported is much larger than the line width of a dopant emission. I mean the bound exciton to a dopant site. Okay, and also like they found that reproducible emission from a given dopant, and also they are found to be more stable. The previous reports for single photon emitters are from nitrogen vacancies in diamonds and acceptor bound excitons in nitrogen doped zinc selenide quantum wells, and the tellurium impurity centers in zinc selenide bulk material. So the first report of single photon emission from a single impurity center in 3,5 semiconductors, which is in this case a gallium phosphide, was reported recently in Japanese Journal of Applied Physics. Okay, so we are looking at optimizing cavity structures for this emission. Okay. So essentially this is the absorption spectrum and this is the luminescence spectrum. We see like many emission lines which are essentially coming from bound excitons where you have either a single dopant atom which is N, or like you can have pair of nitrogen atoms like NN, NN2, NN3. Okay. So what these people in Japan did is like essentially they used the NN4 line which is far away from the gallium phosphide bulk emission, okay, and showed that like there is high probability of single photon emission from this. Okay, so we are trying to optimize the photonic crystal cavity structures for this. So for this, like what we find is that like the active layer thickness is pretty important to get the correct mode as well as the defect mode wavelength to be right, and then like the bottom layer thickness is crucial because like the far field depends on like how the field is getting reflected by the bottom reflector. Okay. So and then like we also optimize the lattice constant and radius of the air holes and the shift in the defect holes to match the correct modes. So this is one of the structure details. So we have, as I said, like quadrupole mode. The Q achieved, the highest Q achieved is about 33,000. This is at a wavelength of 0.93 microns, and these are in terms of lattice constant. The slab thickness is about 0.5, and we also optimized it for, I mean, comparable to the wavelength, which is about 1 micron. And okay, these are the other parameters which are relevant for this. So the important point here is that these holes which are reduced in they have reduced radius compared to the regular air holes. So this is the defect which is forming. So the central hole is removed and these smaller air holes are shifted by 60 degrees away from the center. Okay, so the shift is by about 0.1 times the lattice constant. Okay, so for fabrication we need to check like what is the tolerance of this structure to fabrication. So do some more calculations to check like how the Q value reduces by changing the hole radius or moving in and out of the center and by changing an angle of the shift. So you see that like the optimum is what we have got already. So we can possibly go in a little bit to reduce the effect of fabrication errors. Okay. Similarly, for gallium phosphide nitride, we have Q of about 15,000. Okay. This is for lambda equal to 0.52 microns. Okay. So these structures are to be fabricated now and see like if we can get or like if we can improve the emission. So the next thing we looked at is optical limiter. So essentially we are looking at like optical devices for or planar devices for optical computing, for example. Okay. So we looked at devices like fast switching, the diodes and limiter. Okay. So essentially this limiter is based on the concept of Anderson localization. So the Anderson localization has been studied in electronic waves in disordered materials. This was first reported by Anderson way back in 1958. There are quite a few systems which were studied for this. More recently, like it's a semiconductor superlattices, like so. Essentially, localization of electronic waves was reported in structures where you make these different layers of semiconductors one on top of the other, and you change the thickness of these layers intentionally. Okay, so that's where like you're causing the disorder. So in those structures, like Anderson localization was reported for the electronic waves. Similarly, like by applying an electric field to a superlattice, like with no disorder, there also like people have demonstrated this. So but when it comes to the light field, the electromagnetic field, the localization is reported in photonic crystals with either intentionally or unintentionally introduced disorders. But what has not been shown till now is that like, is it possible to localize the electromagnetic field in PCs in a controlled way? Can we control, if we have a structure, okay, which gives in any case like some bit of localization, it's fine. But is there any way to control the localization? So that's what we looked at. Okay. So here is one of the structures which we designed. This uses the gallium arsenide Kerr nonlinearity. So essentially like we take the N2 where the refractive index N is N0 plus N2 times the intensity I. Okay. So this is N2 corresponding to the gallium arsenide bulk material. So the cavity, the structure is essentially a coupled cavity waveguide structure. So this is a strip waveguide in which like the cavities are essentially formed by shifting the two holes. Okay. And then these central regions are the cavities. So there are 4 holes between the two cavities. And then like at the end like we have 2 holes. Okay. So essentially the important parameter here is like how many cavities we have, okay, and how many holes N and M we have. Okay. What we see in this structure is like this is the linear transmission spectrum. We see this is a defect band. Okay. So these are normalized frequencies. So essentially if we launch if we see the intensity profile, so essentially each one is a cavity here. Okay, so we calculate the electric field profile at each of these cavities, and that's what is plotted in this for these 3 different frequencies. Okay, so this one is close to the band edge, and then we are moving away from the band edge for F1, F2, F3. As you see, like we see that initially as the incident power increases, we measure the transmitted power at the end of the structure. So we launch from here and then like we calculate the field at each of these cavities and also what is transmitted out. So essentially this is a transmitted output as a function of input, and this is for 3 different frequencies, like how the field is calculated for at each of these cavities. Okay. So here what we see is that like there is an initial increase, and then like essentially like the output field like kind of limits itself to a certain value. So the threshold is much lower for F1, which is the band close to the band edge, showing that the shift in the effect of nonlinearity is much larger at the band edge, which is consistent with what has been reported in bulk materials. Okay. So did some intensity dependence of the spectra. Okay. So this shows that band edge shift is not the cause. Okay. This is mainly happening because like it's essentially a random process, because you're launching here, okay, and as the light travels across the cavity through the waveguide, so different cavities have different light localization. So as the intensity, the amount of light which is trapped at these regions changes. Okay, so the intensity I is changing, so the local N2 times I is changing. So the local refractive index changes at each of the cavities depending on how much is the I. So that causes a broadening in the entire field which is across the structure. So that causes localization. Okay. So essentially, if we do for a large structure, like to calculate the localization length, like we took a very large number of cavities, and then we saw as a function of intensity, like how the localization length changes. What we see is that like we can get as small as 2 micron localization length for 10 power 5 watt per micron input power. Okay. So the next device we looked at is an optical switch. This again uses the Kerr nonlinearity of the gallium arsenide. Okay. So here the defect is the cavity is obtained by shifting the 4th and 5th holes. Okay. So this shows the field confinement, strong field confinement at these positions. This is the transmission spectrum. The way this switch works is like you take a off resonant signal beam, okay, and as you increase your pump pulse, okay, so the pump pulse shifts the refractive index of the local refractive index at the defect region. So because of that, like the defect mode shifts. Okay, so once it shifts in the right directions toward the signal starts transmitting. Okay, so the important aspect of this is like essentially if you have a cavity, the lifetime defines like how fast your switch can work. Okay. So for example, if you have a very large Q, so your lifetime, cavity mode lifetime is very long. So essentially like the field is staying inside the cavity for a long time. So essentially it decays down very slowly over very long time. Okay. So here what's happening is that like by detuning the signal pulse from the pump, okay, so it's splitting because of the nonlinearity, the defect mode is splitting into 2, and we see that this is pretty broad compared to the initial spectrum. So here like we can actually transmit a very short pulse. Okay, this is an instantaneous process. So the most important aspect is like this can work, this is only pulse width dependent. So you can transmit very short pulses, we can switch on and off very short pulses even using a cavity structure with just a Kerr nonlinearity. So the other structure which we looked at is an optical diode. So essentially the idea is like, is there any way we can transmit light going in only one direction? So for example, we want to transmit for a given power, the light has to transmit from either top to bottom or bottom to top. Okay. So what we employed here is called a photonic crystal molecule. So if you have a single defect, it's called an atom, and then like we have a pair of these defects. Independently, if you see each of these, the top and the bottom parts, so they give identical defect mode peaks, and together is this thicker line here. Okay. So that shows that the defect mode is almost identical for these two cases, but because the Q factors are different for these two defects. Okay. So what happens is like the amount of confinement is localization is large, the amount of field in this defect is large. So essentially that changes the amount of shift in the defect mode is different for these two cases, for the beam which is traveling from top to bottom and bottom to top. So that's what is plotted here, like the transmitted power as a function of input power density. So the threshold is different for the two cases, like, so this is the downward traveling wave and this is the upward traveling light beam. So I mean, we can decide like some power density and then decide like whether it can travel from top to bottom or bottom to top. Okay. So this happens because of the shift in the unequal shift in the two defect modes. So this is in the in the linear case, and then as you increase the intensities, like, so the shifts are different for the two. So that's how like we get this unidirectional transmission in these structures. Okay. So the next part I'll talk about metallodielectric structures. So we are using like holographic interferometry for this. A helium cadmium laser has been split into two parts, and then we fabricate these grating like structures by using the interference of these two beams. Okay. So we can get like either grating like or 2D square or 2D hexagonal patterns of up to 200 nanometer period. Okay. So the plasmonic metal nanostructures may be interesting for interconnects. So that was the initial idea, but our interest is basically to understand like how light couples to these materials. Then like can we control the 1D dispersion? Then what are the short pulse transmission properties in these structures? So surface plasmons are essentially they are charge density waves at the metal dielectric interfaces. So the Maxwell's theory shows that electromagnetic wave, surface waves can propagate along the metal dielectric interface. So this is the dispersion relation if you have two different materials, epsilon 1 and epsilon 2. Okay. So this is the light line, essentially the dispersion for light. Okay. And this is the dispersion curve for the surface plasmons. So the problem of using light to excite surface plasmons is that the momentum mismatch for a given frequency, for example. Okay, the momentum of the light is not enough to excite the surface plasmons. So you need some way of exciting these surface plasmons using light. So there are two geometries which are used. One is the prism geometry. So essentially using a prism and then the metal layer here. So there is some component of the incident beam is along the interface. Okay, that couples, that excites the surface plasmons. And the other is the grating geometry. So a lot of work has been reported in the literature. So essentially like at interfaces, the surface plasmons have combined the electromagnetic wave and the surface charge character. Okay. And then if you go away from the interface, like the field, essentially the field component decays exponentially. And as I said, like there is a momentum mismatch for coupling light to, surface plasmons to light. Okay. So Barnes has given some model where like if you have a grating like structure, there is a standing wave pattern created. So essentially you can have field maxima either in the metal region or in the air region as shown here. So that gives like two different modes. Okay. You have omega minus and omega plus. So this is a band gap which is created like in the photonic band gaps. Like we can also have plasmonic band gaps. Okay. So one thing is like creating them and then seeing like how short pulse interacts with them. Okay. So first we looked at a structure like this where we pattern the quartz substrate by using electron beam lithography. We make these continuous grooves on the substrate and then evaporate metal on top. Okay. So and then like we used time resolved transmission measurements. We split the one single laser pulse into two parts, and then like one is transmitted through the sample and the other one is a reference pulse, which is essentially both of them are combined in a nonlinear crystal, and you generate the upconverted signal which is coming. So two photons from each of the beams will combine to give a blue light, so which we record as a function of delay between the two beams to get the time resolved information. Okay. So this is the dispersion curve which has been experimentally measured. So essentially what we are measuring is that, like, so essentially there is a pulse which is uniform, a Gaussian pulse which is coming in, and then because of interaction with the surface plasmons, like, so it's showing some fancy shape. Okay. So when the pulse is non-resonant with the surface plasmons, like for example, if you take 780 nanometer wavelength, instant wavelength, like it goes unaffected by the surface plasmons, by the structure. So there is no change in the pulse shape in this case. Okay. But if you look at these different points, like for example, the top edge of the band gap and the bottom edge of the gap, so they show different pulse shape. So essentially at this top thing, like, so the pulse is too broad because the process seems to be pretty fast. Okay. But here, like, the pulse gets a very long tail. Sorry. So what we see is, like, essentially the pulse reshaping is caused by pulse interference with the surface plasmon emission. The pulse distortion is different for the two branches of the surface plasmon dispersion near the band gap. So this is essentially because of the surface plasmon lifetime effect. So we estimated the lifetimes. So what we see interesting aspect is that, like, the lifetime of the surface plasmons at the lower shorter wavelength is essentially like 10 times faster than what is expected. So if you're looking at interconnects, surface plasmon based interconnects, so this is an interesting or important aspect, because if the lifetime is longer, it can travel longer in the structure. So then the question rises, like, is there any way we can control this in a, under given conditions, like, is there any way we can control these lifetimes, the dispersion of these structures? So if we have a metal, okay, before that, like, we also measured the spectral component. So essentially the lifetime is related to the spectral width. So if the lifetime is shorter, you'll have a broader spectral width, essentially as shown in this grayscale plot. So the top mode, like, essentially shows a very broad spectral width compared to the lower one, showing that the lifetimes are pretty different in these two cases. Okay. So what we are looking at now is, like, is there any way to control the dispersion? So for that, like, we are looking at a uniform metal layer with dielectric patterns on top. Okay, so by using external electric or magnetic field, like, possibly we can control the dispersion properties of the surface plasmons in these structures. Okay, so but I mean, it's not very clear, like, how the coupling mechanism is taking place in this. So we did some initial fabrication of these structures. So we see this when the thickness of the dielectric layer is thick, like, we see these Fabry-Perot fringes, and then within that, like, we see the surface plasmon dip. Okay, so that comes only for the p pole rays, the TM pole rays light. Okay, and this is the angle resolved transmission spectra. Okay, this is the AFM image of the fabricated structure. Okay, we optimize the grating parameters by doing FDTD simulations. So the different parameters which are optimized are the dielectric layer thickness, the gold layer thickness, grating period, and the dielectric fill factor. Okay. So here we could actually get different structures, like, where we can control the dispersion properties of surface plasmons. Okay. Now the question is, like, how the lifetimes change and how we can control the lifetimes of these, and further work is going on in this. Okay. So here we could get the surface plasmon 1D band gap in these structures, that is compared with the calculated band gaps. Okay, they match pretty well. I don't have a superimposed image here, but they match pretty well. Okay. So the other part of our work is on colloidal dots. So the interest in colloidal dots is because they have a spectrum covering visible wavelengths, and not much has been reported from non-classical light emission from these, from the colloidal dots. So what we are looking at is, like, isolated dots which are, and also, like, spectrally resolve the emission from the ensemble. Okay, and then see, like, if we can get some indication of non-classical light emission from these. Okay. And also like from physics point of view, like we don't understand how the dynamics of free excitons in presence of dopants are happening. So there are some theoretical reports where they say that like there is very fast carrier redistribution which happens from the dopant sites or the free carriers to the dopant sites. Okay. So what we did is nonlinear photoluminescence measurements or the photoexcitation correlation. So we split the incident beam into two parts and then co-focus them on the sample. So we chop them at two different frequencies and then detect the signal at f1 plus f2. Okay. So the signal measured is essentially this one, the twice the PL when only one of the beams is there minus the PL due to both the beams. Okay. So if we have equal intensity for each of these beams, so essentially if we have a linear process, okay, or a sublinear or a superlinear process, we get either no signal or a negative or a positive signal. So looking at the sign of the signal, like we can say like whether it's a sublinear or a superlinear process. For example, if you have a saturation phenomena, okay, so we see a sublinear process. What is interesting in these things is that the PL, the photoluminescence clearly shows a free exciton peak, but there is no photoluminescence peak in the nonlinear photoluminescence signal. Okay, we don't understand this, so needs a bit more understanding in this matter. Okay, so I did some time resolved measurements. The estimated lifetimes are in the 2 to 4 nanoseconds depending on the incident intensity. Okay. So to check the single photon emission from these quantum dots, like we spatially isolated quantum dots by spin coating on a glass substrate, and then like we spectrally resolved the emission by dispersing the luminescence in a 0.5 meter spectrometer. So the bottom one is the laser, okay, which shows clearly peaks the classical light behavior, but we see some dips where corresponding to the peaks in the laser light. So I mean, we need to understand, like right now we are looking at like how to enhance the signal to noise ratio and suppress information from other pulses. Okay, so that's what is going on. Okay, just to summarize our work, like we are working towards solid state information processing. So our work so far is on photonic crystal microcavity design. So and microcavity based optical device proposals and photonic crystal fabrication using interferometric lithography. So we also looked at like light coupling mechanism in metallodielectric nanostructures. We looked at like plasmon dynamics in metal and metallodielectric gratings. Then quantum dot spectroscopy and dynamics of excitons in these quantum dots. Okay. So yes, for the sake of students, like the existing facilities in our lab are like we have a ultrafast spectroscopy laboratory with tunable 100 femtosecond and 10 femtosecond pulse lasers. We have CW laser spectrometers, then single photon detectors and submicron translation stages for delay, generating delay between the two beams. Then a cryostat with up to 5 Tesla magnetic field. So more recently, like we have a clean room facility in TAFR with for metal or dielectric layer deposition. We have a metal evaporator, atomic layer deposition, and a chemical vapor deposition systems. For imaging, we have a SEM, AFM, and profilometer. For electrical contacts and IB characteristics, we have bonders and probe station. We have a electron beam lithography system, reactive ionizer, and mask aligner for photolithography. So there are some pictures of the new clean room. Okay. And these are the acknowledgements. Like these are the people from TAFR, like Aman and Shailesh are the two project students who worked on designing the microcavity structures. And Dominic is the one who made the L0 cavity at St. Andrews. And Andrew and Ruth are doing most of the measurements. Okay. And Sheng Lan is from China, with whom I worked on photonic crystal designs initially. Then Professor Matsumoto and Sakuma are from Japan, who are working on the gallium phosphide nitride single photon emitters. So the funding agencies involved are like DST or UKIERI, so then NICT from Japan, and the Swedish Research Links. Thank you.